All right, so let's talk about our next project, and that's going to be the G-Spend inspired rhythm collage. This is a super fun one. And what you're going to do, the overview, is you're going to create a collage inspired by the quilters of G-Spend, incorporating shapes and color, value, and rhythm. So the specific learning goals are you're going to create a design that references the unique features found in the G-Spend quilting tradition. And you'll find out a little bit more about what that means later. You're going to also depict one or more type of rhythm in your design by using shape, color, and value. Now, when I say value, I mean tints, tones, and shades. And lastly, you're also going to use dynamic and static shapes and be able to identify them. So let's talk about the G's Bend quilting tradition because that's kind of the whole inspiration for this project. And the who, what, where. The who is that G's Bend quilters, they're women and their ancestors who live or have lived in this isolated African American hamlet of G's Bend, Alabama. And the what is that they've become known worldwide for their unique and imaginative quilting tradition that demonstrates vibrant combinations of colors and shapes and rhythm. And they have truly beautiful work that's unlike anything ever developed before. And one quote for they've been exhibited at universities, museums, galleries worldwide. And one quote from one of their shows was that in few places elsewhere have works been found by three and sometimes four generations of women in the same family, or works that bear witness to visual conversations among community quilting groups and lineages. So the idea that they've been working for generations, and the same family specifically has been working in this tradition, and they've been able to, like it says, bear witness that these quilts can be this visual story of generations as they've evolved. That's a really beautiful and unique piece of the art world. And the where, just so you understand how isolated they really were. So, located in Alabama, Gee's Bend, which is officially called Boynton, it's an isolated rural community of about 700 inhabitants. And the area is named after Joseph Gee. He was a slave owner from North Carolina, and he established a cotton plantation in 1816. Then in 1845, the plantation was sold to Mark H. Petway, and many of the residents in the community can actually trace their ancestry back to the slaves from the Petway plantation. And so that has such a sad, horrible start to think that all that slavery is what started this whole area. But the quilts have evolved into this beautiful, amazing tradition, unlike anything else. So what you're going to do to really understand Gee's Bend quilts even more, because that was just a brief overview, is you're going to go to this website, Souls Grown Deep, and this is maybe one of the best reference websites for Gee's Bend on the internet. And this little link is also available in Canvas as its own page, so you don't have to worry about copying this down. But you're going to look through this whole website, look at the different quilts, the quilters, the different types of designs they were doing, really kind of get a sense of what their visual language is and how they're using their shapes and colors and values. And after you've been about 10 minutes on the website looking around, you should pick at least two quilts that you especially like, and you're going to use those two for inspiration. So if you like more than two, you can pick more than two. But definitely find at least two that you think speak to you on some kind of visual level that you kind of identify with and that you really like to look at. And now you're not going to use these quilts to copy. You're not just going to remake them with paper. Rather, you're going to think about what elements and principles do you really like from them and how can that be a starting point for you. So if you need any help kind of problem solving through that, that's what we're here for as teachers. Please reach out to us. We can definitely help you kind of figure out and pull out what it is you really like from these quilts. And then also, what you want to do is you should know who the quilters are. For the two quilts you definitely pick, know who their names are. If there's any biographical information about it, also know what that is. And you're going to have to use that in your reflection later on. So not all the quilters have information about them, but for any that do, for any that have stories or quilts or photographs, definitely kind of soak that in because you'll be asked to tell us more about that in your reflection. And before I send you off to that website, let's just talk about the formal properties of these quilts a little bit together so you kind of know what to look for. These are really powerful and bold designs. So let's think about them in terms of shape. We've talked a little bit about shape recently, specifically dynamic and static shapes. So what is it about the shapes that in these quilts that makes them static or dynamic? You know it's about the angle and how drastically they're tilted from left to right versus how straight they are vertical and horizontally. So let's pull these shapes out a little bit specifically. Now, if you look at these and compare them to straight verticals and horizontals, you can see how they deviate. You can see how these shapes kind of taper. They can get thinner at one end and thicker at another end. They have these kind of meandering ways of getting from point A to point B, and they just have a lot of unique qualities to their shapes. So when you're cutting your paper specifically to make your quilt, think about this. Don't just use the scissors and cut a straight line because your quilt won't look that inventive, it won't look that dynamic. Make sure you're thinking about, because these are all referencing pieces of sewn fabric that are sewn together, so you're really not actually getting very many straight edges. A lot of these kind of wobble, and that gives them their rhythm. So as you're looking at the shapes, really think about what their shapes are doing, and sometimes even tracing them the way that this example is here can really help you see them more strongly. And then when you're cutting your paper, definitely think about how can you force your hand to waver a little bit. I like to think about it as like being a toddler when you cut. You just kind of like let that scissors really just kind of go crazy and you get fun wavy lines. And now let's talk about the colors, because since you're going to be thinking about shade, color, value, color's a big one. When you're looking at the colors of the quilts, do you see color harmonies? Do you see contrasting warm and cool colors? And do you see tints, tones, and shades being used? And then let's actually think about value as well. Do you see a range of value? Do you see lights to darks? And it can be a little hard to see value when you're looking at a color image. It can be hard to see exactly which ones are light and dark. On this bottom image, you can kind of see it more clearly because we have white and black. But on the top image, it's a little bit harder. So I desaturate the images so you can get a sense of this one has a lot of contrast in the value because you have lights to darks, and that contrast is really visible in both versions of this image. The top image, though, has a lot of contrast, but not in the value. It has some lights and it has some darks, but really the big contrast here is color. We have these bright hues of red, and they're contrasting all these tones and shades of blue. So there's a warm-cool contrast, there's a saturation contrast where you have bright hues versus toned-down tones and shades. So really think about how these artists are piecing together the elements and principles to make up their quilt designs. Now the learning goals for this one, we've gone over this before, but let's just reiterate because they are important. This is the whole reason why you're doing this project, is you want to be able to reference the unique features of Gee's Bend, so hopefully you understand more about what that means after you've been on the website. You want to be able to depict one or more rhythms in your design, so as you're looking at the Gee's Bend quilts, think about which rhythms you think are happening there, and sometimes there's a rhythm over the whole quilt, sometimes maybe just one section of a quilt has a rhythm, and think about which of the 5 rhythms it is, and think about your argument for that. Like, what do you see that tells you it's alternating or random or progressive? And then lastly, you want to be able to have both dynamic and static shapes in your design and be able to identify them. And now the requirements, we haven't talked about this yet, but you want to make sure that in your design there's no white. So no white paper, no white designs at all, but also the board you're gluing onto, the whiteboard, should not be visible at all. I know you've already done a collage, and I'm guessing in that project you learned that to keep that background from being visible, you have to overlap your pieces of paper. So make sure you're doing that with this. You can see how in this example, even the background, which is almost one same color, it's still pieces of paper that are cut up and overlapped. And the reason it's not one big piece of paper is because that's not really what we're referencing. We're referencing quilting, which is putting together different scraps and pieces. So that's why even though this background is almost the same color, it's made up of different little segments. Now your other requirement is that you must use tints, tones, shades, and hues. So you must find a way to put them in your design. You can only have a little bit of shades or hues or tints if that's one you don't like that much, but you must have all present. And you also, when you're done, should cut off any excess paper. So your ultimate artwork should have these kind of straight lines. So either use scissors or the paper cutter and cut off all the straggling edges that you might have. So for today, the way we're going to start is we're going to start with that inspiration, where you go to the website, you peruse what's there for about 10 minutes, you pick your 2 quilts, and then you're going to move on to your draft. And that should probably be able to get done by the end of class on Monday. So for your draft, what you're going to do is in your sketchbook, sketch out your idea. Now you don't have to use colors. You can just use pencil or pen, but you should note where you think you're going to use colors. And you also want to note the things you're trying to accomplish, like where are your static shapes, maybe where are your dynamic shapes, and where are your tints, tones, and shades going to be. The idea is that you're not going to have this perfect guide of a draft to follow. You should make a draft, and then ideally what's going to happen is you'll think of ways to improve upon that design as you make your artwork. That is kind of always the goal, is that your first idea is never your best idea, so it's really important to let that idea evolve as you start problem solving in person. So when your draft ends up looking different than your final, that's actually good. And that's something we grade in the concept evolution part of the rubric. You'll see that there's the first section of the rubric in the project is called concept evolution. If you read the details, you'll want to see that you want to make meaningful changes that kind of demonstrate you've been thinking critically about your design. So you'll be making your design, your draft on Monday, and you want to upload it to Canvas as its own thing. You'll see there's one assignment just for the draft. And if you have questions about your draft, it's a good thing to submit a comment with that submission. That way we know to look at it, give you some feedback, and also that way we can check them in case you were at home doing this project, and we can give you some feedback if we think you need it. So if you have any questions, definitely let us know. And the next video you're going to watch once you're done with your draft is the video about how to actually construct your piece. So that's about a 3-minute video, and you want to make sure you watch that one before you start physically making your final.